I accept my share of the responsibility in the result of the elections.
If you look at race by race, it was close. The cumulative effect, however, was not too close. It was a thumping.
I'm not recommending for every future president that they take a shellacking like I did last night.
Hello, welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
I'm Chaz Licciardello.
It is election week in America and Democrats are still holding on to the hope they can somehow hold on to the Senate.
We're going to be talking to former Senator Heidi Heitkamp and checking all the latest polls. But first...
The final week of the 2020 midterm election campaign saw the major parties wheeling out their big guns. In Pennsylvania yesterday, it was like 2008 all over again, with former President Barack Obama and his former Vice President Joe Biden combining forces to try and boost Democrats, including Senate hopeful John Fetterman. On the stage, Fetterman gave a more assured performance than in last week's debate, but only spoke for 11 minutes. Biden spoke for twice that, Obama 3 times. Earlier, in Arizona, where Obama was trying to drag the endangered Democratic Senator Mark Kelly over the line, the former constitutional law lecturer took time to school a heckler.
Young man, just listen for a second. You know, you have to be polite and civil. When people are talking, then other people are talking, and then you get a chance to talk. Set up your own rally. A lot of people worked hard for this. Come on, man.
On Thursday, President Biden tried to recast the major theme of the campaign from the economy to democracy itself with a live, prime-time address to the nation. And he took aim at candidates who are already refusing to accept legitimate results in the election.
Too many people have sacrificed too much for too many years for us to walk away from the American project in democracy. Because we've enjoyed our freedoms for so long, it's easy to think they'll always be with us no matter what. But that isn't true today. In our bones, we know democracy is at risk.
Look, that was a good try. It might have been nice for Biden to acknowledge that Republican politicians also face violent threats, but he was certainly less overtly partisan and over the top than he could have been a week before the election.
For sure.
Yeah, so that was okay. But his press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, a little less subtle in her press briefing.
Unfortunately, we have seen MAGA Republican officials who don't believe in the rule of law.
Now that spawned a Hatch Act complaint for Jean-Pierre, using her official White House position to advocate for the defeat of a political party, the MAGA Republicans, I believe. And yet it was nothing compared to what Biden's consultant historian, Michael Beschloss, was saying on MSNBC.
A historian 50 years from now, if historians are allowed to write in this country, and if there are still free publishing houses and a free press, which I'm not certain of, but if that is true, a historian will say what was at stake tonight and this week was the fact whether we will be a democracy in the future, whether our children will be arrested and conceivably killed. We're on the edge of a brutal authoritarian system, and it could be a week away.
I'm not sure that's going to help convince people that the democracy thing isn't a political beat-up, John.
Yes, a historian today predicting the future for what historians in that future will say about today.
Yeah.
I think I get it. That was a pretty solid democracy speech from Joe Biden, certainly stronger than earlier in the week when he tried to address the underlying causes of inflation. Fair enough. But then he got his wars mixed up, and then he incorrectly said his son Beau had died in Iraq.
You know, we're dealing with it for a whole second. Inflation is a worldwide problem right now because of a war in Iraq and the impact on oil and what Russia's doing. The war in Ukraine. And thinking of Iraq because that's where my son died. Because he died.
So Biden's eldest son, Beau Biden, was the serving Attorney General of Delaware and in the National Guard when he was deployed on active duty to Iraq in 2009. Almost 6 years after he returned, Beau Biden died of brain cancer. President Biden believes the toxic chemicals from so-called burn pits may have caused his son's cancer. So Beau Biden may indeed be seen as a casualty of the war. But this isn't the first time that Joe Biden has tripped up, saying that Beau Biden actually lost his life in Iraq.
And I mean this sincerely. I say this as a father of a man who won the Bronze Star, the Conspicuous Service Medal, and lost his life in Iraq.
So, to some, it's just another Biden gaffe. He keeps misspeaking. To others, he's deliberately exaggerating. Others still claim that Joe's losing his memory. Either way, it's not helping as Biden considers whether to run for president again in 2024, Chaz.
Yeah, like he's certainly had a bad few weeks for this kind of thing. Here's another fairly trivial yet baffling falsehood, talking about Biden's student debt relief executive order.
The other piece what we're trying to do is, you probably are aware, I've just signed a law that's being challenged by my Republican colleagues. It's passed. I got it passed by a vote or two, and it's in effect.
Okay, now that wasn't a law that got passed by a vote or two. That was an executive order that Biden supposedly wrote. But even stranger was this about the inventor of insulin.
What happened was we said, okay, you know how much it costs to make that insulin drug for diabetes? Cost. It was invented by a man who did not patent it because he wanted it available for everyone. I spoke to him, okay?
It's unlikely that Biden spoke to the inventor of insulin, unless it was through ghost whisperer John Edwards, because the guy he's referring to in that story died in 1941, the year before Biden was born. The thing that stands out about all these falsehoods, though, John, is that none of them provide Biden with any advantage. So whether he's just loose with the truth generally or if he's just confused, I don't know. But those kinds of moments do give his supporters qualms sometimes.
Yes, they do. His predecessor, Donald Trump, though, has no such qualms about telling the truth or falsehoods, nor it seems to his supporters. There are reports this week suggesting that Trump is just days away from announcing what would be his third consecutive campaign for the White House. Axios has been reporting that Monday, November 14 is now looming as the likely date for Trump to start his presidential campaign. And this weekend, speaking in Sioux City, Iowa, the former president all but confirmed it.
In order to make our country successful and safe and glorious, I will very, very, very probably do it again, okay? Very, very, very probably. Very, very, very probably.
Very, very probably ruling out a 2024 presidential campaign, though, today. Arkansas Republican Senator Tom Cotton. He's been talking to donors about a possible White House bid as well, but has announced today that he wants to spend more time with his young family. Presumably the donors weren't that encouraging. Meanwhile, Paul Pelosi, the 82-year-old husband of Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who was attacked with a hammer in the couple's San Francisco home last week, has been discharged from hospital after surgery on his fractured skull.
It's going to be a long haul, but he will be well. And it's just so tragic how it happened. But nonetheless, we have to be optimistic.
San Francisco District Attorney Brooke Jenkins is in charge of the prosecution, and she made this plea.
It is incumbent upon us all to watch the words that we say and to turn down the volume of our political rhetoric. We should be able to all engage in passionate political discourse, but still remain respectful of one another.
Yeah. Good idea. Most Republicans are, though, treating this attack with mockery, if not outright conspiracy. Here's Carrie Lake, who is on track to become the next Republican governor of Arizona.
Nancy Pelosi, well, she's got protection when she's in D.C. Apparently her house doesn't have a lot of protection.
And then Donald Trump buying into the false claim that the break-in itself was faked.
It's weird things going on in that household in the last couple of weeks. Probably you and I are better not talking about it, but it seems, was broken from the inside to the out. And, it wasn't a break-in, it was a breakout. I don't know. You hear the same things I do.
Yeah, we hear them, but they're not true. It's a pity that Donald Trump takes his information from idiots on the internet rather than the FBI, police or the district attorney.
He forced his way into the home through a rear glass door by breaking that glass.
Look, I've got a lot to say about this story and the latest developments in it, but the election is on in 3 days, so I'm going to save it for our Off the Planet Extra on iView, YouTube and Facebook, so go there because these are good points.
I'm sure they are. So, after all of the hype, the hope, the ads, the speeches, the polls, the pundits, the podcasts, the fretting and the bold predictions. This is the week when reality bites. Voters will have had their say and the results will soon be known, even if some Republican candidates are literally already refusing to accept anything other than their victory. Heidi Heitkamp is the former Democratic Senator from the state of North Dakota, and she's with us now. Senator, welcome back to Planet America.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I always like talking to you folks. You guys are fun.
I don't know how fun the election is going to be for you and your fellow Democrats this week. It does seem as though history and the economy are conspiring against you. How are you feeling this week?
I think that all of the traditional trend lines, people's, Joe Biden's approval rating, favorabilities, unfavorabilities. Right now, 75% of people in the United States think it's on the wrong track. When you look at what people care about, crime, they care about inflation, they care about the economy. Those are all issues that they give much higher marks to Republicans. So that's on the negative side of the ledger. On the positive side of the ledger is the people really are starting to see that the basics or the fundamentals of our democracy really are on the ballot. Of course, Democrats see that more than Republicans. This is going to be very difficult to keep the House of Representatives, but I think on the Senate, there's still a fighting chance. I have colleagues who are more optimistic than I am now, just because I always look at the fundamentals, and the right track, wrong track numbers are just really bad for the Democrats.
Heidi, a president's party facing the fundamentals that the Democrats are at the moment would be expecting to lose maybe 30, 40 seats in the House. But yet a month ago, the Democrats were looking at keeping the Senate and potentially even keeping the House. So what, in your view, is a fair pass mark for the Democrats on Tuesday?
It'll be decided in Nevada. It'll be decided in Arizona. It'll be decided in Pennsylvania, and again in Georgia. And we've got more fighting chances than they do in other states like Ohio, like North Carolina, where we have a great candidate, where in Florida. But if this is a bad night for Democrats, we could see the Senate not just be at that 50-50 or 51. We could see senators, actually, especially first-term senators, really struggling to hold on to their seats, and in states like New Hampshire, where Maggie Hassan's race is closing. Michael Bennett's race is closing in Colorado. And so there's a number of places that they're investing.
So, Senator, if all the polls are right, the United States is about to head into a period of divided government, with the Democrats in charge of the presidency, the Republicans in the House, and very probably the Senate as well. What are the implications of that? Does all legislation stop from this point?
The presidential campaign starts the day after this one. It's already started. And what's going to happen is, the 20 senators who see themselves as presidents are going to basically, I wouldn't say politically grandstand, but their agenda is, how do I make my mark for the presidency? And the Republican agenda in the House, if they get the House, is how do I make life miserable for Joe Biden? By investigations, by there will be, in my prediction, very little interest in legislating, and that's the tragedy of the system that we have today.
Heidi Heitkamp, Joe Biden is the oldest person ever to hold the presidency of the United States. In a couple of weeks, he is going to turn 80. Is he really the Democratic Party's best hope of holding on to the White House in 2024?
Hey, he's going to have to decide. We are a party that, or in this country, it's not really done where someone seeking a second term would not get their party nomination. And so this is a decision that will have to be made by Joe Biden and his family. But I will tell you this, I think the House of Representatives, by making his family's life miserable, will have a role in whether that decision is positive or negative. President Biden has never served with a Republican majority in either house, so he's been insulated from a lot of the antics and a lot of the crazy that can go on. Let me tell you, it's going to be a miserable time for Joe Biden and his family, and I think that's going to play a role in this decision.
In the wake of the Paul Pelosi assault, Heidi, it seems like the current environment for politicians is particularly corrosive and antagonistic. Leave aside the nutters for a second, it seems that there's more hatred generally directed towards and in fact between politicians than there has been for some time. How do you address those kinds of issues?
It's a very, very dangerous issue because of the response from the other side. We should be united in opposing this. I mean, anyone who has laughed at Paul Pelosi being, having his home broken into, and then, to take away sympathy because they see that maybe Nancy Pelosi would receive some kind thoughts, but then invent an entire conspiracy theory. And think about that, an entire conspiracy theory about this break-in. That's what's dangerous. What's dangerous is that we're not all united against this behavior. And it's not new, but I'll tell you what I tell people when they ask me about it. I said, so if I'm trying to recruit a young mother to run for a House seat in Michigan, how do I tell her family is safe if she speaks her mind? How do I tell her if she takes a position that's contrary to a position that a right-wing fanatic doesn't like, that she's safe? I can't. And so this is the problem, that we are not only endangering the people who are serving, we're restricting the pool of people who want to serve. And this has to end. And it has to end by the parties uniting against it.
Now, it's long been a truism in American politics that
it's the economy, stupid.
But this year, even stupid is well aware it is indeed about the economy. Literally every poll has the economy as the most important issue to voters, often doubling the next most important issue, which is why these kinds of numbers will be giving the Democrats heartburn. According to the Wall Street Journal, only 19% of people said the economy is heading in the right direction, 11 points down from August. Who's to blame though? Well, only 27% of people said Biden's policies are having a positive impact on the economy. 54% are saying they're having a negative impact. How about inflation? Well, as far as that goes, 64% say inflation is rising and straining their finances, with 36% saying those strains are major. That is the highest result on that question for the Wall Street Journal this year. 48% of voters said the Republicans would be best to get inflation under control. There's only 27% said that the Democrats would be best to get inflation under control. So, none of that is good for the Democrats. It gets worse though. 35 points more of those surveyed by Gallup have negative evaluations of the economy than those who have positive evaluations. Net negative 35. That is the worst assessment of the economy since Gallup started measuring this back in the 1990s. That includes the GFC. And that is a little strange because the news isn't that bad. The unemployment rate's been around 3.5% for much of the year. Job openings have been hovering at record highs for most of the year as well, driving wages and working conditions up. It's really the inflation rate that people are focused on, which, even though it's considerably lower than it was back in the late 70s, it's currently dwarfing inflation rates over the last 20 years, as you can see there. It's topped out at just over 8%. If you remove food and energy though, which is what the Federal Reserve is looking at, it's actually still going up, even now. Now that's a concern, because that might mean they would continue to raise interest rates. And the Federal Reserve, in fact, have already raised rates 6 times in a row, with the last 4 rises being 0.75% hikes each. Interest rates are now between 3.75% and 4%, which is a lot more than zero. That's where they were at until recently. And this is creating fears for some that a recession could be just around the corner. So, John, rather than passing on anonymous fears from people I just made up, why don't we talk to an economist?
Why don't we do that, Chaz? Betsey Stevenson is Professor of Public Policy and Economics at the University of Michigan. She also served as the Chief Economist at the Department of Labor under President Obama. And we asked her whether Biden could have done more to manage inflation and, in doing so, improve Democrats' electoral prospects this week.
The truth is, the Republicans who are going to take seats, don't get me wrong, they are going to win elections over this inflation issue, but I don't think they're going to solve the inflation problem. And I think that there's not much that the Biden administration or Democrats in Congress could have done to put us in a good enough situation regarding inflation that they wouldn't have faced this problem at the polls. So that's sort of my point, is like, sure, they could have given out a little bit less money with, say, the American Rescue Plan. They could have not done, they did payments to everybody. It's called the economic impact payments or stimulus payments. Maybe they should have only targeted the households who really needed it. That might have chilled inflation a little bit. Perhaps they could have not given student loan forgiveness, and that might have chilled inflation a little bit, but that also comes at a political cost. So it's not clear to me any of the things they could have done to put us in a situation right now where we might have a little bit lower inflation would have done them any good at the polls.
And you can see that full interview with Professor Betsey Stevenson in our Off the Planet Extra. It's up now on YouTube, Facebook and iView. America's governors are a little bit like the president of their state or territory. They are also executives with far-reaching powers, but they have to work with state legislatures and the courts within the bounds of a state constitution.
The so-called Stop Woke Act that prohibits Florida's public schools and private businesses from making people feel uncomfortable or guilty over their race, sex, or national origin.
Any laws or budget measures passed by the State House go to the governor to be signed into law, or they can veto it. And in most states, governors also appoint the judges as well.
Governor Newsom announcing the appointment of California's first openly transgender judge.
Governors run police and other services and agencies and share control of the National Guard, America's military reserve force. So it is a big job. 17 of America's 46 presidents were governors first, including Carter, Reagan, Clinton and George W. Bush. But one difference with governors, unlike presidents, they can be born non-citizens overseas.
Bullshit. I want to be the governor for the people. I want to represent everybody.
Recently, governors have been deciding on their state's responses to the COVID pandemic, whether to order shutdowns or mask and vaccine mandates.
We won't go back! We won't go
And in the past few months, states have moved into the centre of the abortion debate after the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe versus Wade. Now states are free to make their own laws on abortion once again.
Some states already have taken action, and depending on where you live, it's going to look different.
Of the 36 gubernatorial elections to be held this week, 20 are in states held by Republicans and 16 by Democrats. There are some fascinating, close, high-stakes contests as well. In states like Arizona, where Democrat Katie Hobbs has blown a 7-point lead in August to now be trailing Republican Kari Lake in that race to succeed Republican Governor Doug Ducey.
He's a lion. Hear him roar.
Lake is a former TV news anchor and former Democrat turned very Trumpy Republican who claims the 2020 election was stolen.
All I'm saying is we need to restore honesty and integrity and transparency to our elections.
In fact, Kari Lake is so Trumpy, she's reportedly on his shortlist as a possible vice presidential running mate in 2024. But not if she loses to Hobbs, who refused to debate Lake, and it hasn't helped her. Another Republican with an eye on higher office, Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis seems to be on a glide path to re-election against former Governor, now Democrat Charlie Crist, who's been trailing by at least 6 points since June. It's now double digits. In Georgia, Republican Brian Kemp survived a primary challenge after he stood up to Donald Trump's false election fraud claims. Democrat Stacey Abrams played a big role in Joe Biden's win in Georgia in 2020, but the polls have found she's struggling to get within cooee of Kemp. There are a few furrowed Democrat brows in the upper Midwest as well. In Michigan, Governor Gretchen Whitmer's lead over Republican Tudor Dixon has ranged from 1 point to 17 points in polls over the last month. But right about now, it's around a 5-point gain. In Wisconsin, another state Joe Biden won narrowly in 2020, the Democratic Governor Tony Evers is in trouble, falling behind his Republican rival Tim Michels, who scored an upset primary win thanks to the backing of Donald Trump.
I wish he was president today.
Another incumbent Democratic governor in trouble is Steve Sisolak in Nevada. He's also slipped behind Joe Lombardo, the sheriff of Clark County. Sheriff Lombardo was happy to take Trump's endorsement as well, but has been a bit more measured in his praise for the former president.
You think he was a great president?
I wouldn't use that adjective. I wouldn't say great. I think he was a sound president. I think he had policies that he brought forward that was beneficial to the country and supported the country and moved the country forward versus backwards.
Governor Sisolak had a consistent 2-point lead through the summer, but has now slipped behind as concerns over the economy and crime continue to mount. And a libertarian, Brandon Davis, is getting 4 or 5 points in some polls, hence they're both below 50. Meanwhile, high-profile Democratic challenger Beto O'Rourke is really struggling to try and oust Republican Governor Greg Abbott in Texas. That's a race where abortion has again been a central issue.
The vast majority of Texans absolutely disagree with Governor Abbott's total abortion ban with no exception for rape or incest.
Beto, a former congressman and presidential contender, is trying to become the first Democrat elected governor in that state in over 30 years, but the polls are not offering any encouragement. After trailing by 11 points at the start of the year, Beto O'Rourke is still at least 7 points behind in most polls. These elections for governor will have a major impact on what laws restricting or guaranteeing abortion access could pass in the next year, and will also provide a springboard into presidential contention for the winners and probably bring the political careers of some of the losers to a rather abrupt end. So, with less than 2 days until voting in America draws to a close, let's take a close look at some of the latest polls, Chaz.
Let's. We've already talked about the economy, John, but the polls on crime have been extremely ominous as well. 56% of people, according to Gallup, believe crime in their local area has increased over the last 12 months. That's a record for Gallup over a 50-year period, even through the 1990s when crime dominated politics. And just to remind you, what crime victimisation surveys look like comparing violent crime rates from today to the 90s? The difference is quite stark. Look at that drop-off. And yes, at the national level, violent crime has not gone up a lot lately. That's the flat line at the end. Not to mention senators don't really combat crime. Anyway, mayors do.
Yeah.
Regardless, you know the demographic that this is most targeting, this crime thing? Mm-hmm. Black people. 81% of registered black voters say that violent crime is very important to their vote, compared to 56% of white voters. Only a third of white Democratic voters say violent crime is very important to their vote, but 82% of black Democratic voters say it's very important to their vote. So that is why on the Georgia airwaves, they're currently filled with crime ads. And over in Pennsylvania, they're seeing a lot of this kind of thing.
John Fetterman wants ruthless killers, muggers, and rapists back on our streets. And he wants them back now. John Fetterman is dangerous.
I think they think Fetterman is the one committing all the crimes.
Yeah, it's the hoodie that does it.
He shouldn't carry scissors around. Anyway, time to look at the big picture. 538 is giving the Republicans an 84% chance of taking the House and a 55% chance of taking the Senate. So the Senate, at least, is still very close. House, not so much. If every one of 538's favourites wins, that would be 51 seats for the Republicans to 49 for Democrats in the Senate, and 225 seats for the Republicans to 210 seats for the Democrats in the House. And if that is how it turns out, with the Democrats suffering a 10-seat loss in the House, they would be thrilled, John, because they're looking at the potential for considerably worse than that. Since World War II, the average loss for the president's party is 26 seats. For the past 4 midterms, the average loss has been 37 seats. That's the average. But right now is not an average time. Just 17% of Americans say they are satisfied with the direction the country is going in, according to Gallup. That's the worst since 1992 when they started asking people that question. And that measure is highly correlated with midterm results, history says. When more Americans are dissatisfied than satisfied with the direction of the country, the president's party loses an average of 33 seats. 46 seats if it's a president's first midterms. Remember, they're at 17% at the moment. Well, what about presidential approval? Biden's at 40%, according to Gallup, the second lowest in 50 years, just ahead of Bush in 2006. Presidential approval, again, also highly correlates with midterms outcomes. So seen as Biden's at about 40% approval, look at that dotted line there, you can see the circle, that there is the Biden zone. That's about a 40-seat loss that's looking at. By the way, for the Senate, Trump lost every Senate race in 2018, every single one, where his approval rating was below 48%. Biden's approval is around 40% in every single competitive state. Okay, what about the election prediction models that use a variety of factors? Okay, there's the Gary Jacobson's model. That gives Democrats a 45-seat loss. There's the Louis Beck-and-Tien model. That gives Democrats between a 44-seat and a 37-seat loss. There's the James Campbell model. That gives Dems between a 36 and a 42-seat loss. Losses all over the place, John. Making predictions is hard, as they say, especially about the future. But this is looking very, very red-wavy in the House at the moment, no matter how you slice it. As for the Senate, well, the Democrats have a lot more of a chance there, but still underdogs for sure, no doubt. Should we take a stab?
Let's do it.
Okay, 52 seats to the Republicans in the Senate and 195 seats to the Democrats in the House. That's about a 25-seat loss. Over to you.
Well, if Democrats can limit their losses to 25 seats in the House, they'll be very, very happy. They'd probably be happy to lose more if they can find a way to hang on to the Senate, maybe in a runoff election in Georgia next month. That is not looking likely, but the coin could flip in their favour. We'll find out soon enough. That is all for this trip to Planet America. Midterm election day on Wednesday here in Australia. We'll have a special live show on ABC News at 9 p.m. Eastern Summer Time. It is when we get the results that I'll give you my prediction.
That's why he's smarter than me. In the meantime, you can tune into all the extra stuff we didn't have time for in Off the Planet on iView, YouTube and Facebook right now. See you later. Bye-bye.